Very good afternoon to each and everyone over here, the panelists. So we are going to start with our next session. For that, let me just invite the key instructor over here, Dr. Vinita Gupta, and I request her to take it over. Thank you, ma'am.
I request Swapnila to not interrupt in between. You can come in right in the end, okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So welcome everyone to this instruction course on diabetic distress. And as you all know, with the emergence of the concept of refractive cataract surgeries and with the upcoming advancements in the field of sophisticated technology, as well as the softwares which are available with us, even with the use of artificial intelligence in ophthalmology. Now we have armamentarium of high-power calculation formulas, but the purpose of all this is to achieve and have a very happy vision at the end of our cataract surgery. So this course is all going to aim and tell you what tips and tricks you should use while doing your calculations and each and every type of situation, whether it's a usual normal person with normal cataract, with a normal axial length, or a person with special problems, special situations with extreme ranges of axial lengths or extreme other situations or scarred corneas or whatever is the problem in that patient. And the purpose is that you get best results in all types of situations. So not to delay further, I'll start with the first talk of the session. I'm the speaker for that. So I'll start with my screen share. I'll be talking and giving tips on the basic pulse and perils of biometry. So what is biometry? Biometry is actually the process of measuring various physical parameters of the eye and using this data to determine the ideal intraocular lens power. And what is the most important thing is for gathering, the first thing in this is to gather a good data. How do we do that? And what are the important components of that? The essential components of this are to have an axial length measurement and keratometric measurements. The other additional measurements include the white to white and the lens thickness. Whom should be the person who should be doing the biometry? It should be done by a person who's the surgeon himself or a person who's very well trained assistant of yours. When it should be done early so that you get ample time to calculate the IOL power, because you may have IOL powers in patients where you may need to arrange those IOL powers which are out of range. And also you will get ample time to counsel the patient to know what type of refractive error does he want to have. In case you want to have a refractive error, some refractive calculations to be done at the beginning before planning your surgery. Keratometry is one part of it, which is basically an estimation of the corneal power. Remember, a good keratometry measurement is very important because it is not only the one which is used in the calculation of the IOL power, but also it indirectly estimates your effective lens power position. And also it helps in planning your astigmatic control during the surgery. Remember, we are actually measuring only the anterior radius curvature, and we are using these readings to predict the posterior corneal curvature as well, using a refractive index of 1.3375. There are various modalities available for this. Most commonly used ones are the automated keratometry or the optical mode. But what are the tips which are important? I'm not going to go into the details of the instruments. What is important is remember that you should always remember to calibrate your instrument, whichever instrument you're using. Ensure that there is a good tear film and untouched cornea at the beginning of measurements. There is accurate centration. For this, you need to occlude the other eye and take average of multiple readings. It should be done in a dark room. And in case there is evident scarring, use the other eye and recheck if there are extreme values less than 40 diopters or greater than 48 diopters, or there is an asymmetry between the two eyes of greater than 1.5 diopters. For excellent measurements, we have ultrasonic measurements and the optical modes. Now, ultrasonic waves, as we all know, basically in this echoes are reflected from the various ocular structures and which are deciphered to use the distances starburst. Now, the tips which are to be taken while doing your excellent measurements using ultrasonic modes is please calibrate your instrument again. Check that you have set it at the correct velocity settings. When you're using the contact method, do only a gentle touch. Look for good ultrasonic spikes. There should be appropriate gain settings on the machine, and also ensure that the patient's eyes are axially aligned. That is, he's fixating on the fixation light of the probe. Take average of multiple readings. Repeat if the difference between the two eyes is more than 0.3. Record preferably before dilating the pupil and avoid use of any ointments. This is just a photograph. This is just a diagram showing you the reflectivity. All these spikes should be perpendicular to the horizontal at 90 degrees. So, and they should be almost having an 80 to 90 to 100% of reflectivity. What are the advantages of ultrasound? Obviously, it is easy to perform, can work in the densest of cataracts, and it is cost effective. But what are the disadvantages? Obviously, a contact mode causes corneal compression. There is a risk of abrasion, and there may be misalignment issues. A little advantage in ultrasonic measurements is gained by using Prager's shell, which helps us in doing the modality, using the modality, which is the immersion ultrasound. In this, a water bath is created between the eyes and the corneal surface, in which the probe is immersed.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, ma'am, but the screen is stuck and we cannot see the next slide. Others, please confirm.
Is it okay now? Can you see my
face? Yes, we can only see the front slide.
The slides are not moving.
Yeah, it's not.
Slides are not moving.
Can you try once again, Vinita, to take you the next slide?
I'll have to stop sharing screen share again then. Okay.
Yes, now we can see.
Okay now?
No, go to slide share first and then change the slide and see.
The slide is visible. Just start this presentation.
Yeah, okay. Are they changing now?
No.
You're not gone to the slide share.
I've gone to the slide share.
In my
PC is showing a slide share only.
So select the slides like that only.
It's show like this only without slide share then.
No, slide share is there. I mean, the slide show is not started.
No, I'm on the slideshow only. That's what I'm saying. I am on the slideshow only. Otherwise, I'll go on the without the slide share then. It's not working. Is it?
Yeah, you can select those slides now.
This is fine. You can just show it like this.
Go like this then, okay? So, so for the optical biometry, as we have already mentioned about the immersion ultrasound using a Prager's shell, obviously the advantage of immersion ultrasound is accuracy increases. And other advantages of ultrasonic mode are there, but the disadvantages are similar, and the added disadvantage is the patient can get wet. So the better option is obviously to use an optical biometer, where we are using infrared diode lasers, and we have different machines based on different types of technology. We have the partial coherence based interferometers, we have OLCR based biometers, and we have swept source based biometers. But all of them, what is important in them is that obviously the wavelength of the rays which are used is smaller than the ultrasound waves. Hence, the resolution is far much better. Tips in these cases, again, ensure that while taking measurements, there should be a moist ocular surface, ensure alignment, choose the correct mode, and a slight mid-races may be helpful in these cases, especially when you are dealing with a posterior subcapsular cataract. The advantages more added to it are the very high repeatability, observer independent, fast, precise measurements, and the same machine can do multiple measurements of your multiple parameters. There's no physical contact, no anesthesia is required, there's no corneal compression, and you're measuring along the visual axis. But the disadvantage being, obviously, it is a little bit more expensive as compared to your ultrasonic machine, and does not work if there is significant posterior polar or a posterior subcapsular cataract. What next? After the data has been gathered, we have to use one or more of the IOL calculation formulas. So we have an armamentarium of formulas available with us. Which one to use? There are various formulas based on vergence, on ray tracing, on artificial intelligence. What is more important to remember out here is which formula not to use. Remember, out of these formulas, SRK2 is not now obsolete. This is because I just give an example for that. There are certain excellence at which even a 0.01 millimeter difference causes a change in the IOL power of more than 1 diopters. An example of this is excellence of 22.2, you will get an IOL power of 22.95 using this formula. And with an excellence of 21.99, you will get an IOL power of 23.98. So which formula to use and where? Obviously, this will be taken up by my other speakers. So broadly, for short eyes, you can go for Hoffer Q. For average eyes, you can use any of them. For long eyes, SRKT may be preferable. But now with the Hill RBF and other artificial intelligence tools, we can use any formulas. Another scenario after your surgery, after you have done your surgery, would be a scenario where you have done excellent surgery, you have a quiet eye, a pristine cornea, but still your patient is unhappy. And why? Why is that? Because you've still landed with the high refractive error and a refractive surprise. So how can you minimize this? Again, is by need to hit. And then our purpose is to hit the target so we can start optimizing our results. And there are various strategies for this. This will again be taken up by my next speaker, so I'm not touching on this. And again, remember to be extra cautious, extra diligent in situations where you have special parameters of the patient's eye, because you have to be very, very diligent to have best optical outcomes in such suboptimal conditions. In the end, I would just like to summarize that while doing your biometry, please measure both eyes. Always use the correct mode. Remember, most individuals have similar axial lengths, and most of the corneas are regularly curved. So if you have variations or deviations going from this range of axial length or this K readings, please recheck. Same way, look for asymmetry between the two eyes. And if you do not have a reason or a known documented answer for it, please repeat your measurements. Repeat your measurements if the average corneal power is less than 40 or greater than 48 diopters, axial length is less than 22 or greater than 25 millimeters, or is the difference in axial length between the fellow eyes is greater than 0.3 millimeters, or difference in the corneal power of the mean corneal power is greater than 0.9 diopters, or the difference in the emmetropic implant power is greater than 1 diopters. And repeat on different days with different machines. Use multiple formulas. Change of IOL, remember whenever you're changing the IOL at the time of surgery because of some complication which has occurred during surgery, and you're changing the position of the IOL or the type of IOL, please do the recalculations and also ensure to do calculations according to the position of the IOL placement, whether it is in the bag or whether it is in the sulcus. And also remember to use the A constants mentioned on the boxes of the IOLs, especially when you're using different modalities of measurement. For optical, there are different A constants. For ultrasonic measurements, there are different A constants. And do not intermix them, because obviously that will make a difference to your IOL measurement, IOL calculations. Audit your results scientifically and use them to reapply in your practice, re-optimize your results and calculate your A constants. Thank you. After this talk, I'll invite over my next speaker, who's Dr. Shalini Mohan. She is working at the GSVM Medical College, Kanpur as an associate professor, and she'll be talking about the optimization strategies for IOL power calculations. Dr. Shalini Mohan, please.
Thank you, Dr. Vinita. Are my slides visible?
Yes.
And I'm audible?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, AIOC and Dr. Vinita, for having me here in this wonderful IC on biometry, which is an important aspect of phacoemulsification surgery. Now, we know that cataract surgery has become equivalent to refractive surgery because of high patient expectation and because of improved modalities of IOL power calculation. And we understand that biggest and strongest factor in giving good results to patient is good IOL power calculation. However good surgery you do, if there is problem in IOL power, your patient will never be happy. And that is why we need to optimize our factors while calculating IOL power. So till now we have understood that in normal eyes, we use various IOL calculation formulas. There are various factors which are and variables which are brought together to make an IOL power. Now, keratometry, axial length, and some of the formulas also use ACD and lens thickness. Now, there is one important factor which is effective lens position, which is the position of lens behind posterior curvature of cornea. The problem is that it is an assumption. Why? Because it is said that short eye produces shorter effective lens position, and longer eyes, they will result in deeper effective lens position. The anterior and posterior segment of human eyes are often not proportional. So this is just an assumption. Another important thing is that it is assumed that flat K readings will result in a more shallow effective lens position, which might not be always true. Therefore, this is an important limitation of IOL power calculation formulas. Now, when we talk of various lens constant which are available with various formulas, like for SRK regression, we have A constant. In Holiday, we have Surgeon's factor. In Hoffer's Q, we have PACD. So the iron manufacturers, they suggest a working lens constant based on the type of lens, some studies, and whatever experience previous researchers had. It is a good idea to start with that. But the problem is, can these be generalized for all? Obviously not, because all eyes are not same and all surgeons are not same. So what to do in such a scenario? We need to optimize each and every component of IOL power calculation. So surgeons must personalize their own A lens constant to give a specific formula for themselves, which can be used in their own clinical practices to give best of the results. So now let's talk about keratometry optimization. Now we should have maximal keratometry accuracy, because we understand that keratometric errors, they lead to 1:1 correlation with refraction post-operative period. So we need to have a single instrument, as Dr. Vinita emphasized, that we need to check and recheck. If there is any doubt, we need to recheck the keratometry readings and always use a single instrument. Another important factor is that ensure that it is properly calibrated with the spheres available with the machine, and if there is any problem, call the manufacturer and get it calibrated nicely. Another important thing is, suppose you have a keratometry mirrors which are not reliable, put a drop of lubricant and do it again. And if there is any doubt, don't forget to get a topography, because sometimes you might see some subtle hidden things which are there, like formicrustic keratoconus. Next comes to axial length optimization. Now, this is single and most important cause of incorrect IOL power. Now, ultrasonic A scan is now actually, sorry. So if we see that ultrasonic A scan biometer due to variable corneal compression and because of issue of accurate angulation, they are not very reliable. So immersion A scan biometry is unquestionably a more reliable method because of no corneal compression, and when used with Prager shells, that gives very good results. But if we want to have precision in biometry, optical biometer is the answer. It uses short wavelength light source, as we know, and it increases the accuracy by 5-fold when compared to ultrasound. Moreover, it has been seen that optical biometer accuracy is at the level of 0.01 millimeter in comparison to immersion, which is 0.1. Still, we have so many patients in which optical biometer is not possible, and then immersion is the answer in such patients. Now coming to another very important factor, which is A constant and which needs to be optimized. Optimization is a process of finding the specific value of a lens constant that is specific for the surgeon and for the IOL. So it is a sort of retrospective calculation in whatever data we have available with us. So we need to collect data. If you can collect a data of good number of patients, obviously the results will be good. But practically, if you have a data of 25 to 30 patients for one single lens, it is also very nice. So the key elements are you should have a preoperative keratometry, axial length, IOL power which is used, and then stable post-operative refraction. Then there can be certain outliers, like sometimes you might be having a posterior capsular plaque, or you might be having posterior staphyloma, undetected silicone oil, or you might be having post-operative CME, which might lead to hypermetropic errors. So we need to exclude all these things while we are taking our own data. So let's see an example. How can we do this? Suppose we have our mean keratometry of 44.25 and axial length of 23.4. And A constant for the lens which we have implanted is suppose 118.0, and IOL power implantation is 21. So what if, and what is the post-operative refraction? It is minus 0.5 diopters at spectacle plane. So we need to convert this post-operative refraction into refractive error at IOL plane. And if we remember our basics, it needs to be multiplied by a factor of 1.25. So now the refractive error is at IOL plane is minus 0.625. So what we need to assess, what should have been the ideal IOL power, which should have been implanted inside the eye, is equal to actual IOL power plus refractive error at the level of IOL plane. So here, what will be the actual IOL power? Ideal IOL power should have been 21 plus, and mind you that we need to mention this sign, minus 0.625. So that equals to 20.375, and this should have been the lens which should have been implanted inside the eye. So if we remember the SRK2 formula, this was the IOL power, minus A minus 2.5 AL minus 0.9 K. So this is the standard formula. So from this formula, if we can put the value of ideal IOL power, we can get an ideal A for which is customized for the surgeon itself. So A is the A constant, ideal power plus 0.25 AL plus 0.9 K, and that comes to 118.69. So now the A constant for that particular surgeon is 118.69. So this is the method by which we can do, but it seems a bit complicated and lots of calculations are involved. Another method is Aristotle's method, in which what you do is you calculate the prediction error. That is the measured value minus the predicted, and take average prediction error for a sample of 100 eyes. But again, here we need to add 0.1 diopter for 1 diopter of 0.1 diopter of hyperepic error. We need to add 0.06 in Holiday and 0.12 for SRKT. This is another complicated method. Best method is to go to the website, and each IOL is having lens constants optimizer. Feed in your data and you get all the details. Another option is you can go to doctorshill.com, where you can again feed in your data. If you don't want to do all this, you just enter it in Excel spreadsheet and call the person who is dealing with IOLs. All the companies, they are having people who can optimize your IOL. Just give your data and they will get the A constant for you. So another important thing is optimization of surgical technique. We should optimize each and every steps of ours so that we can have good control on our steps and good post-operative results. Important thing is capsular rhexis diameter. If you have a larger rhexis, which is not covering the optics, the lens keeps popping out, and that will change the effective lens position and resulting into change in effective lens power. So we should have a rhexis rule of good centered rhexis, which is covering the IOL optics equally. So to conclude, I will say that we need to minimize each and every variable which is there in IOL power calculation formulae. Verifying each and every measurement is very, very important. We should rely either on immersion ultrasound or optical coherence biometry. We should track our refractive outcome and subsequently optimize the lens constant. And we should also try to optimize our surgical technique. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Shalini. My next speaker is now Dr. Vanithi, who's a cataract and refractive faculty who's working at RPC. And she'll be talking about the calculations to be done when we are using a toric IOL in our cataract practice. Dr. Vanithi, please start your...
You're not audible, Dr. Vanithi.
Yes. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks again, and nice to be with you all this afternoon for this virtual session on biometry. So I'm going to just give you the salient features on how would you go about refining toric IOL so that your outcomes are much better. No financial interest in any of the products mentioned during the course of this presentation. So I'll be outlining how you would go about refining in the four aspects of toric IOL planning and execution: preoperative phase, the marking phase, the intraoperative period, and in the postoperative sections here. So first is the decision making on the IOL which you're going to be choosing or needing for the patient here. When you're planning a toric, and if you find that there is a discrepancy or your biometry is not satisfactory, perform it over a range of instruments here, and so that you would be able to compare the magnitude and axis of the IOL power which you've selected for your patient over a range of devices, and that would help you to sort of narrow down which would be the best one to use for your patient. And now, as most of us have switched over or moved on to using premium IOLs, it would be a good idea to use your sweat source OCT or your image guided options for in your preoperative planning here. Various types of preoperative markings. You could move over from the conventional 2-step or the 3 steps marking. A simple slit lamp marking also works well here. Once as a surgeon, you're experienced to do it yourself and you know to tailor your results and you've been able to correct your flaws, then that works fine as well. Otherwise, a simple pendulum marker or your bubble marker works just as well. Looking at the meta-analysis, of course, the image-guided systems afford a better accuracy, narrowing it out to the depths of 0.1, 0.2 diopters, which is available there. But we still do not have IOLs which can cater to 0.2 or a 0.1. We do still work at a 0.5 level difference with our IOLs here. But definitely an image-guided image captures preoperatively and intraoperatively will help to enhance and refine your toric results. What we do have in terms of preoperative devices is the Berion and the Callisto here. And in the intraoperative, you have the intraoperative aberrometer for recording your refraction in real time and basing your IOL placements based on the imaging you get. They all work on the simple principle. There is a preoperative reference image which is superimposed on the intraoperative image using landmarks, and this graphic overlay guides you towards a better placement along your target axis in all your cases here. So that's how we work on the IOL alignments here. Most of these systems also have additional usage on planning your incision sizes and placements, but most of us are now doing sub-2, so this is not a huge advantage which you're here, but it can help you with your capsular axis size if you want to. But what's more important is focusing on the pre-existing ocular surface health here. Identify a dry eye, treat the dry eye, and call the patient back on a different sitting with a different technician who's going to perform, or you perform yourself, but when you're having variations in your keratometry because of a poor ocular surface here. So that's one aspect which you need to take care to refine your results in patients here. Of course, the intraoperative imaging gives you a real-time imaging when you have the luxury of using an Aura. And that can give you both aphakic and post-operative pseudophakic refractions, and you could place your, you could choose your IOLs if you're having a load of inventory here to pick up the right IOL over the one which you have planned, which would be a great help in refining your results here. Or you could also vary your axis and your cylinder on how your Aura is showing the intraoperative imaging. So here's one such patient here, and once you are able to position, once you've done your phacoemulsification, it captures the aphakic refraction in the Aura, and once you put in your IOL, you can repeat the imaging, and the imaging will then tell you how to rotate the lenses in your patient, and it's a whole battery of suggestions, and you would learn to pick up the one which would be the right for the a better results in your patients when you're refining your toric results. I think I'll just rush in through show you a few examples of patients here. Here you have here you see a significant cylinder which you would like to correct with your torics, and your Barrett's is giving you a T3. The Varion is giving you a T3 here, but the Aura is give you a T4 here. So that's how it helps you to refine when you're using an image guided. When you don't have the Aura, I still feel the Barrett's is a better option. A second option here where the Barrett's gave me a T4, and the Varion also gave a T4, and the Aura was also going on bang on giving you a T4. Then you know your accuracies. A simple method postoperatively is to image on your tracy refractions or on your ray tracing methods using an eye trace, which would help you to locate and say if your postoperative positioning is inadequate, especially in patients if your visual acuity is a good method of assessing how if your postoperatively your IOL needs a rotation. These are operative images on aura once you have positioned the IOL and once you have rotated into a position and captured an imaging, which it tells you where no further rotation is required, which means you've gone bang on to what has been calculated. Yet another example here of the patient where the Barrett's gave a T4, the Varian gives a T5. So these are situations which are a little confusing here, and your aura goes on to T3. So again, this varies with the against the rule and the with the rule astigmatisms you need to correct. So understanding those aspects are going to be really important. Sometimes your eye trace does show huge rotations here, and if it is coinciding with the visual acuity of the patient postoperatively, you would want to refine going back and rotating your IOLs. But you don't need to rotate when you have a 2 degrees or a 5 degrees and your visual results are good. You do not need to go back and rotate your patients at all. So the important pearl is measure correctly always and place correctly. So these are the two most important pearls when you're tackling toric IOLs, so that you will be able to get good outcomes, and you will be able to refine your outcomes to the optimal levels in patients. The importance in this is that there is a cyclotorsion in the patients, and this results to untoward surprises, especially when you are having patients with against the rule and when you have higher quantums of astigmatisms, which you need to be correcting here. Always take into account posterior corneal astigmatism is now of significant importance. So use some of the newer generation devices when you're planning your torics or premium toric IOLs here. And those will help you to get a better result. So the true K component is now incorporated into most of the softwares and in most of the latest biometry devices, and they help you to give you a better astigmatism. Where you do not have a posterior K incorporated, then always try to corroborate the anterior K with your refractive astigmatism, which gives you a better idea of what's going to be the quantum of the posterior cornea, and especially if you are going to be worried if your against the rule astigmatism is going to be higher, because you know the posterior cornea is has an against the rule astigmatism. Most of us have now moved to feeding in a centroid value of 0.1. Some use 0.2, but we do not use the conventional 0.3 in our calculators when we are feeding in the SIA. So there is a subtle shift in the centroid value used for your calculations, which can also enhance your results here. Postoperatively, remember the long-term astigmatic drift which can occur on the ocular surface here. So you would probably want to leave your plan in such a way you leave about a 0.3 with the rule astigmatism. That's another way in which you can probably refine here. So again, remember with the rule astigmatisms over 1.5, and if you do have a significant against the rule astigmatism on the anterior corneal surface, then that's an indication where you probably need to relook at your results and refine them as well. And if you've gone, just take half a minute more here. And if there are, if the patient is visual outcome is not optimal, then simply dilate, look at the positioning. You can use a simple slit lamp, the slit beam and the rotator there to locate, or there are a series of softwares, smartphone softwares in which the image can be put in and look at and use it for guiding you for rotating the IOLs, or the astigmatismfix.com. It's another site which will help you to refine your results in case of postoperative surprises. Thank you again for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Vanithy. Now I'll invite our next speaker, Dr. Jasleen, who will be talking about situations when we have to work beyond the normal. And these could be high refractive errors or extreme ranges of refractive errors, or ranges of axial length, as well as the situations when we have abnormal corneas, which could be a scarred cornea, or which could be a cornea which has gone a refractive surgery previously, or a post-keratoplasty eye, as well as situations where we are dealing with small eyes or pediatric eyes. So let's go on to Dr. Jasleen for her views on biometry in special situations and how to do the calculations in these situations. Dr. Jasleen, take over, please.
Thank you, AIS, and thank you, Vinita, for this opportunity. And thank you also to the speakers who have covered quite a bit of biometry in special situations. I have no financial interest in any of the products mentioned. And, in this era where we have cataract surgery as a refractive surgery and patients' demands are high, they want to be spectacle free. So in this era, it becomes important to understand that although the newer generation IOL formulae, the advancement in biometry techniques, the advancements in IOL per se, a lot of these things have made it very easy, very good to be able to predict the IOL power to within 0.5 diopters in, say, about 85 to 90% of cases. But special situations continue to be challenging, so it is very important that when we are doing an IOL workup, we must be a part of the process. And it's also very important to, go in gradually to personalize your e-constant. Preferably, we should go in for the newer generation formulae, and we should preferably use the better biometric technologies. Also, now we have access to a lot of IOL formulae online also. So multiple IOL formulae can be used in challenging cases. So cases where you have an extreme axial length or a steeper or a flatter cornea or an inter-eye asymmetry, or there is a mismatch with the refractive status, just keep your eyes open, double check all the values, validate the measurements. And also very important is to counsel the patient. So if you have a patient where you are not very confident about the post-op refractive outcome, you must discuss with the patient so they have reasonable expectations. Also, I think over time, we are in these challenging situations, even though there are multiple new formulae now, there can still be some errors. And we are all, I think, going a lot by, in certain select cases, also going a little bit by our clinical experience, on that set of patients. So what happens in these extreme of eyes is that it becomes difficult to predict the final resting position of the lens in the eye. So that is the effective lens power. So because of this, even if our measurements, which oftentimes are also prone to errors in these cases, the short and the long eyes, we may not get a very accurate measurement. The third issue, which is commonly there, is that the very high powers like plus 30D and all, there is availability and labeling issues also with regard to the lenses. So in patients, although we have, are you able to see my entire slide, or is it getting cut a bit, I think?
We can see it.
Okay. So although the formulas like the Holiday 2 have about 7 parameters that they are measuring, in the normal eyes, we may not even need more than the standard 3 because they have not found very statistically different results. However, these parameters, that we measure, they are based on this presumption that longer eyes have a deeper AC depth or shorter eyes have a shorter AC depth. But that happens only in about 10% of long eyes and about 20% of short eyes. So in the rest of them, the AC depth is not really dependent on the axial lens. So there is this factor that does come into play. In the newer generation formula, one formula that is standing out a lot recently is the Barrett Universal 2. So this is giving us good results over the entire range of axial lens, and is being used, I think, also it's being incorporated in the newer biometers. So it is being used with a very good predictability in the extreme axial lens also. So important in these eyes is that when we acquire measurements, we should take multiple measurements. We should preferably use the optical biometry because there you are, visualizing the fovea. You are sure and confident of your axial lens measurement. And in the case that you don't have an optical biometer, you can go in for an immersion scan. In that case, preferably in the myopic eyes, you should go for the vector BA scan, where you are doing a B scan, identifying the fovea and taking the A scan at that point. What happens in myopes is that you may, in the extreme axial lens, you can have a posterior staphyloma, and that can confuse you, and you may take the anatomical axial length rather than the refractive axial length. So one has to be careful about that. Also, these eyes, they have a low scleral rigidity. So if we go in for a contact biometer, we will introduce an error likely. The Barrett Universal tool, like I've mentioned, has done fairly good predictability for these eyes. The other that is being recommended is the Van Gogh modified axial length. So in the eyes that have an axial length over 25.2 millimeter, you should modify the axial length and then fit it into the formulae. Because the IOL constants are not well suited to the long eyes. The Haigis formula allows optimization of constants and has been found to be more accurate in case you have axial lengths more than 30 or a cornea flatter than 43. Of course, the Hill RBF method, which is available online calculator and uses artificial intelligence and is based on multiple data entries, also can be used to, you can converge the results from various formula to see what is most likely to be near the endpoint that you are recommending. And of course, leave the patient towards the myopic side. With regard to extremely short eyes, again, prefer the optical measurements. And remember that the short eyes are very unforgiving. So very small errors in measurements are going to translate into a disproportionately large effect on the refractive outcome. So if you have an axial length of 20 and it's changed to 19 millimeters, the IOL power can change by as much as 5 diopters, or a small shift in what the calculated effective lens position is causes big surprises, because here the lens is closer to the fovea. If we use the ultrasound biometry, one can go in for the Hoffer-Q, which is more accurate in these shorter axial lengths. Otherwise, the Holiday 2 or the Barrett Universal 2, these are giving better results. And the Haigis can be used when the AC depth is less than 2.4 millimeters. The IOL labeling is an issue, especially in these hypermetropic eyes, because the IOLs are not available at 0.5 diopter gap, but rather at a 1 diopter gap over 30 diopters. And the labeling may also be a bit inaccurate. So it may be off the 0.4 diopters of the labeled power. Here again, we must aim for a slight myopia. And it's important, of course, in all these extreme axial lengths to also be very careful about your surgical technique and have a good well-centered rhexis and a well-centered IOL, so that, the number of variables that are there are reduced. So also do a specular in these eyes. And if the IOL power is, in the nanophthalmic range, then we can go in for a custom-made IOL. Yes, there's a lot of discussion whether one should use just one formula or go in, put in your results in multiple formulas. So I think if one goes by perhaps one or two, not one, but at least 2 formulae, and, personalize your set of cases over a period of time, your A constants, that does decrease the variability factor. As Vinita has already covered, if you have to go in for a sulcus placement, the effective lens position is moving more anteriorly, so you have to decrease the IOL power. And there are these charts that tell us how much to do so. Preferably, one should go in a single sitting for a single IOL rather than a piggyback, which one can reserve for patients with refractive surprises. And here the calculation, one just needs the refractive power. So you just need the myopic or the hyperopic correction that can be multiplied with the refractive error. And in the silicon oil, I'll just take half a minute more. So in the silicon oil filled eye, because the speed of sound is lower, we have to use a conversion factor to the measured axial length. And the IOL required is usually 3 to 3.5 diopters stronger than that indicated by the standard power calculation. If we are going in for a silicon oil removal, then we must keep in mind that we have to accordingly, assess the IOL power rather than if we are going in for a long-term silicon oil. Again, for aphakic, pseudophakic, and silicon oil filled eyes, we must prefer the optical biometry, which is going to give us some more accurate results than the immersion biometry. And in these eyes, we should plan the position of the IOL pre-operatively and then plan the power accordingly. So we must not, be the blind man. We must not just look at what we are able to see, but look beyond at all the parameters, at all the reports, and accordingly, we should fine-tune the IOL power after adequate monitoring of the patient. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jasleen. Now I invite upon the next speaker, who is Dr. Shashwat. He is again a cornea and refractive surgeon, and he'll be talking about IOL power calculations in post-refractive eyes. Dr. Shashwat, please.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Am I audible and visible to all of you?
Please start your screen share.
Yes. Am I? Yeah. So I just want to find out if I am audible or visible at all.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And here it comes. So good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm going to take you through the torrid 8 minutes of post-refractive IOL power calculation. And this is alternatively can be called a biometry from hell. And to guide you through this graveyard of ophthalmic reputations is going to be your friendly neighborhood ophthalmologist here, roasting in Delhi's heat. Very well. So why is it such a problem? There are basically three problems. And the first is instrument error. The second is the keratometric index error. And the third is the formula error. Let's take them one by one. I will go slightly faster so that my other speakers can, have some time. The instrument error is the first is the keratometer. Remember, it measures the radius of curvature of the paracentral cornea, not the central cornea. So this misses the central flatter zone after myopic LASIK and overestimates the corneal power by a mind-boggling 15%. So that is a huge amount, just because it is just measured the paracentral and not the central. It is blind to the center. The second problem is an index error, which is due to an assumption which was made in the infancy of keratometry. The normal refractive index of the cornea is 1.376, is not? But the assumption states that it is actually 1.3375. Now, why is this? This is because if we take this assumption, then it converts a 7.5 millimeter radius of curvature of cornea into a nice round figure of 45 diopters keratometry. That is why it was taken. But remember, this assumption is only true for a virginal cornea. It is only true for a virginal cornea when the corneal back to front surface radius of curvature ratio is 82%, which is normal. This is not true in myopic LASIK, where it changes to 68%. And after hyperopic LASIK, it changes to 90%. So this assumption is completely false and adds another 10% of error, so which means a total of 25% error of keratometry. Now, that's a huge amount for calculating IOL power. So what do we do? So what we do is to directly measure the central corneal curvature, anterior and posterior, with the help of instruments which you have now, the Pentacam or OrbScan 2 or the OCT, whatever you have. We have the Pentacam, which is now very common. And we use this Pentacam, use a rotating camera with an unpronounceable name, which captures 25,000 data points in 2 seconds and creates a 3D image of the anterior segment of the eye like that. So this gives us, so which image should we pick up from the Pentacam? Out of the mind-boggling number of maps that the Pentacam has, we pick up the Holiday report. Holiday report, as you can see there. The Holiday report, which measures corneal power at different zones, it was done in collaboration with Dr. Jack Holiday and Oculus. And we take the EKR map, the equivalent K reading map, which measures central corneal powers across various diameters. You can choose your diameter. The best diameter, in my opinion, though it varies, is about 4.5 millimeter for central corneal curvature. Why? Because less than 4.5 excludes too much of the pupil. More than that, the Stiles-Crawford effect kicks in, which means that the intensity of light decreases when the light enters the pupil from the edge and not from the center. So we take the 4.5 map, we pick up the keratometer, and we have got our keratometry correct reading. What about the third problem, which we seem to have forgotten? The third problem involves the ELP, effective lens position, which is the post-op IOL position, which is the holy grail of biometry, which is the most critical feature for all formulas and it's difficult to estimate. Now, the third generation, so-called American formulae, Hoffer-Q, Holiday 1, SRKT, etc., the ELP is predicted by the axial length and the keratometry. But as we know, keratometry is going to be flat here, is not. So the flatter K assumes a shallow anterior chamber and estimates the ELP more anteriorly, but this is incorrect. There's no change in ELP at all because the anterior chamber is just as deep as before. It's only that the cornea has become flatter due to refractive surgery. So it's a completely false thing, and this is an additional error. So we can correct this by the Arambere's double K method, a landmark paper, where we use two keratometries. One is the pre-refractive surgery keratometry, which predicts the ELP, so that's fine. And second is the post-refractive surgery keratometry, which predicts the IOL power calculation. And this correction has to be applied in all third generation formula, otherwise in deep trouble, like in this example. Let's take a preoperative keratometry of 45 and post-refractive keratometry of 36. Axial length is 24.5, A constant is 118.9. Let's say I want to put an IOL of that constant. Calculating for emetropia using the Holiday 1, but no double K correction, I get a 26.6. But if I use a double K, I get a 29.37, which is a 2.8 diopter hypermetropia, which means on day one, patient can barely see the 660 line. Okay, so that's in deep trouble. So we have to include this correction in all the formula. Now, one trivial question. How many formula have been published for calculating IOL powers after refractive surgery? It's a mind-boggling 35, and still more coming and counting, is it not? So which one do we choose? Decisions. Let's make it easier for all of us. We have these free online IOL calculators, many of them. The most popular is the one published by the American Society of Cataract Refractive Surgeons. But we also have the iLab and we have the APCRS also. The most popular and the simplest, I think, is the American Cataract Surgery. So we go to this website and we find the calculator like this, and we feed in all the data. Pre-refractive, which gives you the refraction, the keratometry, and post-refractive refraction, and the keratometry and the topography. We feed in all the details. It's pretty simple once you've got all your findings. And then we press calculate. The most beautiful word in the English language is not I love you or check enclosed, but calculate. You press calculate, and here you have. Let's take an example of how much maths is taken care of by the online calculator. Look at the maths. This is an example of a pre-LASIK refraction of minus 11.25 and a post-LASIK refraction of a minus 2.25. That's quite a bit. Pre-LASIK keratometry was 42, post-LASIK is 36. Axial length is 20H, which does not change. AC depth is 3.5 millimeters. Now, this is what we have data. But remember, this is the refraction, but this is not at the corneal level. At the cornea, which is calculated by the online calculators, the refractive power at the corneal level is completely different. And this is taken care of through the maths. The pre-LASIK refraction is actually using complicated formula at the cornea is not 11.25, but minus 9.91. Similarly, the post-LASIK diffraction at cornea is not minus 2.25, but minus 2.91. So the actual correction at the cornea is actually 7.72. So the corrected K comes out to be 42 minus 7.72, which is 34.28 and not 36 at all. When we apply this to the formulas, let's look what we get. We get a 20.6 to IOL power calculated by the clinical history method and the double K, 20.4 by Shamas, 20.8 by Haggis, 20.6 by the Masket and the SRK, The consensus is 20.62. Being generous, we implant 21. And we have a marvelous post-op refraction of minus 0.5 cylinder of 90 degrees. Absolutely astonishing. A patient crying with happiness and a doctor laughing all the way to the bank. Very well. Now, about RK is a completely different ballgame altogether. In RK, the problem is that the both surfaces flatten, actually, as you can see here, but not equally. And the Scheimpflug images reveal to us that the posterior surface flattens more, 33% compared to the anterior surface, which is 22%. And coupled with the smaller optical zone, instrument error is more likely. So again, we go back to direct estimation by the central formula made by Pentacam. Let's see how surgeons have learned over the many years. Look at this problem we had. A 43-year-old male with a cut left eye, RK done 17 years ago for minus 11, 8 cuts RK, a pre-op refraction before cataract with 2.5 with a minus 4 cylinder, leading to 6.8. This is for cataract, before cataract. K1 52, K2 38.5, and axial length is 30.5. IL power calculated for emetropia with SRK was 1.5. A very nervous and palpitating surgeon implanted 5 diopters to be on the safe side and lands up with a post-op refraction 4 weeks later with a mind-boggling plus 12 diopter with a minus 2 cylinder. And this is the surgeon's condition trying to dodge the patient. I beg your pardon, I don't know if it's going to work. This is the condition of the surgeon now who's trying to dodge the patient all over. I'm sure we don't want to get in this condition. So this is what happens if you go by your instinct. So what we do is go back to again the IS calculator, ASCARIS calculator, our old friend, feed in the details, press calculate, and get the answer. So what are the take-home points? We have to educate the patient about IL power estimation and not a calculation. Aim for myopia about -1 for RK. IL powers multiple formulae because no single formula is superior. And when in doubt, choose the higher IL power. Avoid multifocal IOLs like you would avoid your ex-girlfriend. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for having the patience to listen to this rambling talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shashwat, for such a difficult topic and such a difficult situation to be covered. Now I'll shift on to the next topic, which is to be covered by myself. And I'll be talking about how to do IL calculations in pediatric eyes. I'm keeping it not on the slide share. I do not know whether my slides will move or not. So I'm keeping it like this. So choosing an IL for small eyes or pediatric eyes, which we are actually tender eyes, is it as easy as a child's play? No. Why is it so? Although the
slide so mode.
इससे हो नहीं रहा था ना, last time it was not moving, so that's why I'm not taking it there.
एक बार करके मैम सेंटर में क्लिक कर दीजिएगा.
अभी ठीक है? Is it there? Are my slides changing?
हाँ जी मैम.
Okay. So obviously, as we know, the power calculation in a child is not as easy as a child's play. There have been dramatic advances and revolution in the field of biometry in adult cataract surgery, but the field of pediatric cataract surgery is still lagging behind. And why? Why is it so? Because in a child, we are choosing an optimal IL power for a child eye, which is best befitting that small eye. We are implanting a fixed power lens into the eye that is still growing. The younger the child, more is the problem. And also, remember, we are using formulas that have been originally designed for adult eyes. So what are the concerns which we face? There are the measurement issues. There are IL power calculation issues. There are issue of target refraction. There are different types of IOL issues, what materials of IOLs to be used, and besides the long-term issue of the myopic shift and the visual axis opacification. As we all know, the normal axial length of the eye around birth is 17 millimeters, with the maximum rapid growth occurring during the first 3 months, and then a slow growth after till 15 years. Similarly, keratometry at birth is around 51 diopters, and there's a dramatic change in the corneal curvature in the first 18 months of life. And similarly, in the lens power of the crystalline lens, there's a dramatic fall in the first year by 10 diopters. So if you look at the various studies, the maximum amount of myopia is occurring in the first 2 to 3 years of life. And what are the factors which affect this myopia shift? Is not only the eye growth of that particular child, but also the laterality of the cataract, whether what is the age at which surgery has been done in the child, whether an IOL was implanted or not, what are the genetics, as in what is parents myopic, and what is the visual input which is being given or timely refractive corrections being given to the child with his growing parameters. In a pediatric age group, obviously what is happening in these cases, obviously they have different parameters, which means they have more steeper corneas with a higher keratometric readings and a smaller AC depth. So the standard IOL power formulas are inadequate, because when we're doing measurements with ultrasonic modes, then the ultrasonic velocity is different because of these parameters. And secondly, they are changing parameters since it's a growing eye. What is the difficulties which fail doing measurement?
Slide नहीं हो रहा है.
मैं इसीलिए बोल रही थी ना, I'll go in the
center में एक बार click कर दीजिए मैम.
I'll go with this mode only. We do not have time. Okay. So we have the measurement issues, which is obviously difficulty in doing measurements in the office settings. Most of the patients are required to be, and most of the measurements need to be done under anesthesia. When we're using under anesthesia, we're using handheld refractometers, and we are using ultrasonic machines. So obviously there are more errors in measurement. And even in the ultrasonic mode, we are more likely using a contact mode of ultrasound measurements. So more effects of compression, lower the ocular rigidity, greater is the compression, smaller is the eye, therefore there is more impact of compression. What are the issues with the handheld keratometers? Obviously, their accuracy is less as compared to the stationary keratometers, the automatic keratometers, which are kept in the OPDs. And secondly is the lack of fixation and anesthesia, leading to inaccurate K readings. As regards to measurements of the axis length in children, again, we are using more commonly ultrasonic methods, again using under general anesthesia. So obviously, whatever modality which you are using, whether immersion or appurnation, we are not perpendicular exactly to the retina. Although if you have to use out of the blue, immersion scan is the one which is the recommended scan. The best is to measure in an aphakic mode in these cases and use the CAF method to do the IOL power calculations. Why do we need to do this? This is because, remember, in small eyes, the lens is a greater proportion of the axis length. Hence, the average velocity of the ultrasonic waves is faster. Optical biometry, as in adults' eyes, would be obviously more reliable and accurate, highly reproducible, non-contact, and observer independent. But right now, we have limitation in the resources of handheld optical biometers. Then, what are the IOL power formula issues? Remember, all these power formulas which are used for calculation are derived from the adult data. Also, in the children, the calculation of the power is such that we have a higher power of the IOL which is required to be implanted. So higher the power, more exact axial positioning of the IOL is required. And these pediatric eyes have less predictable IOL positioning because of the shallower AC depths, greater vitreous pressures, steeper corneas, and also because of the higher chances of capsular contraction syndromes. Whichever formulas which we use, all of them give unpredictable outcomes. And there's a very little difference between any of these formulas. And the variability is more if the age of the child is less than 2 years. As for an adult eye, obviously I will desire that I will be able to hit the target. But what should I do to do that? So I have to do certain undercorrections. So the goal is undercorrect. In general, higher the IOL power, greater would be the undercorrection which is required. Bilateral the cataract, greater is the hyperopia I would aim at. But if it is a unilateral cataract, lesser would be the hyperopia I would aim at, because I do not want to induce anisometropia and cause anisometropic amblyopia. If the normal eye has a significant refractive error, then I will aim to choose closer to the refraction of the opposite eye. But if there is a dense amblyopia, I will aim for a lesser hyperometropia. If there's a poor compliance regarding follow-up and use of spectacles and post-operative corrections, then again, I would like to leave the child with the least possible refractive error. For unilateral cataracts between the age of 2 to 4 years, a general formula which we can use is calculate according to the spherical equivalent of the fellow eye minus 1.25 diopters. But if the age is more than 4 years, we need not undercorrect and give it equivalent to the spherical equivalent of the fellow eye. While for infants less than 6 months, aim for a moderate hyperopia of about almost 3 to 7 diopters. While between 6 to 12 months, we can aim for a hyperopia of roughly around less than 3 diopters. There are various IOL calculators also available, again on the site of ACRS as well as APOS sites, which can be used for doing these calculations and predicting the future growth to predict the IOL power calculations. In general, I use these calculations in my practice for the correction. There may be situations when we are dealing with IL part calculation in a child who has had a surgery during infancy and the IL was not implanted. So in such situations, it is important to do calculations as a secondary IL implantation. Remember, if the child has been using contact lenses, so the contact lenses need to be discontinued before any measurements are done. We can calculate using aphakic refractions without the AL or the K values by using pediatric IL calculators for this. Also, we should remember which place we are implanting the secondary IL, whether it is in the bag, in the sulcus, or in the anterior chamber, because a more plus power IL that is more anteriorly placed will have a greater refractive effect than if it was placed more posteriorly. So the intraocular position will depend upon, and the prediction error will depend upon the position of the secondary IL being placed in the eye, the sulcus eye fixation producing a relatively myopic shift. And then we have the concept of piggyback ILs, which Jasleen has already touched upon. We can have a primary piggybacking in the children where we do calculations using a pediatric piggyback IL calculator, where one lens is placed in the posterior chamber, or we can place two ILs in the posterior chamber, one in the capsular bag and one in the sulcus. Or we have a secondary piggybacking where we can use these correction formulas depending on what is the refractive aphakic correction, existing refraction, whether it is myopic or hyperopic for secondary IL piggyback calculations. In the end, I would just like to summarize that it is important that you should customize your calculations for each case depending on the age, laterality of the cataract, what is the visual acuity and myopic status of the child, what is his likely compliance in the post-operative period as regard to glasses, contact lenses, and occlusion treatment, whether there is any family history of significant refractive errors, and where has the IL been placed in the eye. Remember, these are not miniature eyes, but growing eyes, again requiring extra diligence, and careful consideration should be given to the changing parameters, and this can make a big difference to your outcomes. Thank you. I now invite upon our next speaker, who's Dr. Mukesh Taneja, who's working at Khmer Sight Institute in Cambodia, presently as again a corneal surgeon, and he'll be talking about solutions for IL calculation in the post-keratoplasty eyes. Dr. Mukesh, please take over.
Thank you, Vinita. So my topic is concerns regarding the IOL part calculations in penetrating keratoplasty, also other corneal transplants. Most of the work which I shall be presenting in this presentation was done in LV Prasad Eye Institute, where I was working till about a year and a half back. So this is a case of a 63-year-old gentleman who was being treated by us for HSV keratouveitis. When he came to us at this particular visit, his keratitis and uveitis was stable, and he had a scarring and a cataract, which was responsible for his diminution of his vision. So the plan was to do a triple procedure. We took a keratometry, a standard K of 44 diopters, and based on that, the IL power calculation was 21.5, which was used for this particular patient. So a routine standard PK triple was done. Post-operatively, the patient did well with the vision of 20 by 125 improving to 20 by 80 on pinhole. However, 6 months later, the vision dropped to 20 by 320 and with pinhole 20 by 125. And what was the refraction at 6 months later? As you can see, -10 spherical and -12 cylinder at 170 degree. And what was the reason for that? So this is in the topography. As you can see, the keratometry in the operated eye now is 48.8 and 55.3. What we assumed during the IOL power calculation to be 44. But now in 6 months, this has changed to a very steep cornea. And this is the reason why the patient had so much of a refractive error. So now people are thinking, including myself, that probably triple procedure may not be the procedure of choice in these situations. And people are now thinking about doing preferably a sequential surgery. Earlier, there used to be a major concern about the damage to the endothelium, which one may have after doing a phacoemulsification in operated penetrating keratoplasty cases. However, now there's much better, safer techniques of phacoemulsification, and the viscoelastics are also much better, and there is hardly any damage to the endothelium if it's a normal average cataract. And the IOL power calculation would be much better if you do a sequential surgery. Talking about the triple procedure, it was first described by Taylor way back in 1976. The advantages are obvious in the sense that you do one surgery and there is a faster visual recovery. However, there are intraoperative concerns, like because you're doing a surgery in an open sky environment, so the risk is much more. Many times you will have a very significant upthrust, and it's not easy to do a ECC in this situation. Personally speaking, over the past 20 years of my corneal surgery experience, I have had 2 expulsive hemorrhages in PK. The main problem, however, is post-operative visual gain, that is the refractive error. So there are various studies which have shown that the refractive error which one ends up after a triple procedure is very unpredictable, and it can range from as low as -15 diopters to +8 diopters. And the patient therefore has a very significant vision problems. And therefore, this amounts to difficulty in calculating the IOL power for the triple surgery. And the main problem is basically as to what K should you choose for this. Many situations you may have a proper keratometry reading available in the other eye or the fellow eye, which you can use for calculating the IOL power calculation. However, if there is no significant or a regular eye in the fellow eye, then you may end up using a standard K, which we routinely take as 44 diopters. Many people have also used 42, 43 diopters as standard K, but the problem remains the same, that the post-op refractive error calculation is very unpredictable. There is at least one study where the author, Dr. Salahuddin, has used donor keratometry. That is, he has used the keratometry which he did in the donor eyes before they were retrieved from the diseased person, and those K readings were used for calculation. And he, in his paper, he has mentioned that they were significantly better than the standard Ks. However, more and more people, including myself, now I want to go for mainly the sequential surgeries as long as possible. Now, sequential surgeries you can do in 2 modalities. One is, suppose it's a patient has a hard cataract where you cannot possibly wait for a cataract surgery later on. So in these situations, I prefer to do a cataract surgery, open sky cataract surgery or a ECC. However, I do not implant the IOL in these situations and just do a peak. After 6 months or so, when the keratometry stabilizes, then you can put in a secondary IOL. So this gives you, in this particular study, about 95% of the patient had ±2 diopters, which is much better than the standard K values. And now, as I said, with the advanced and the safer techniques of phacoemulsification and better viscoelastics, you can always do a PK first, and maybe after about 6 months, you can plan a regular phacoemulsification process. What you need to understand is a lot will depend whether it's what kind of a cataract is it, and whether it's, if the patient is one-eyed and that is the only seeing eyes, then probably triple procedure is the only option, because you cannot possibly wait for 6 months for the keratometry to stabilize and then do a secondary setting. So these are the situations where you will still end up in a triple procedure. However, if the cataract is not very advanced, I prefer to do a phacoemulsification 6 months after the PK. And where the cataract is very advanced, I prefer to remove the cataract and leave the patient aphakic and implant the IOL after a proper biometer after 6 months. So the combined approach would be that you do a lens removal but do not put an IOL. So this example will clarify, like this patient had a triple procedure done with PK, ECC plus IOL, and the standard K of 44 were used. And you can see how the refractive error is -2.75 sphere and -6 cylinder, roughly a spherical equivalent of about -6. In this particular case, where the patient had a corneal amyloidosis, I chose to do a sequential surgery. That is, I just simply did a PK. And after 6 months, we did a phaco with IOL. And you can see the refractive error is much more predictable, plus 1.25 sphere and minus 0.75 slender, a spherical equivalent of just about plus 0.75 and a 20/20 vision thereafter. So I believe a sequential surgery is a much better option wherever it is possible. That should be preferred. The other scenario would be these days is DSEK with phaco and IOL. So in this situation, what you need to understand is that these patients the keratometry is not an issue here, but these eyes, because you are adding thickness to the cornea, these eyes tend to be hyperopic after the surgery or after the DSEK. So you have to allocate for that hyperopia. So you aim in your regular biometry, you aim for minus 1.5 diopters in DSEK triple procedures. In DMEK, the hyperopic shift is about 0.25 to 0.5 diopters. So here you basically aim for a minus 0.5 diopter. Otherwise, the biometry is the regular biometry that you do for DSEK and DMEK. So that is all about the biometry concerns in PK or coronary transplants. And thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Mukesh. Now I'll go upon our last speaker, who will be talking about the situations where we actually, despite our best efforts, land up with a refractive surprise. So how do we deal with that? Dr. Rishi, please take forward from here for your views on how to deal with refractive surprise.
Thank you, Dr. Vinita, and congratulations on a very successful IC, which has been running year after year. And it's a pleasure to be part of it. So you've done all these things which everyone has told you, or you've not done many of these things, and you end up with a surprise. How do you deal with it, and how do you analyze it? So basically, it's important that we make sure that we don't have this problem. And a lot of the previous speakers have highlighted how to prevent having a refractive surprise after IOL calculation. So which are the patients who are prone to develop this kind of a problem? The hypermetropes, high myopes, basically extremes of axial length. Any patient with an irregular cornea, which is post-RK or post-refractive surgery, patients with scars, with ectasias, patients with unhealthy ocular surface also can give you very wrong K readings, which can affect your outcome. Post-vitrectomized eyes, because your effective lens position will change. And then I mentioned post-keratoplasty eyes, which was very nicely recovered by Mukesh in the previous talk. So when we have a refractive surprise, I think all of us have this kind of a look when we see the AR on the first day. Oh God, why did this happen? And you have to try and analyze why it happened. Was it a difficult cornea? Like we mentioned, was it a patient who was prone to develop a problem? Sometimes, post-RK eyes, whatever you may do, you will still often end up with a refractive surprise, or if you have a very irregular cornea. So you cannot really be sure. But other than that, there are other causes which can cause refractive surprises. One of the common causes that we see in the clinic is a capsular distension syndrome, which is basically you're left behind some viscoelastic in the bag, and that works like a myopic lens and causes a myopic shift. IOL malposition, so if your lens is partly in the bag, partly in the sulcus, or it's in the sulcus instead of being in the bag, or if you've had a fibrosis of the capsule and your lens position has changed, all of these can cause refractive surprises. Biometry errors, of course, can be one of the main reasons, and in all probability, that is the cause. And of course, entry or procedural errors. If you've put the data in wrong, obviously your result will come out wrong. So what are the options for post-refractive surgery, post-cataract surgery refractive surprise? You ended up with this problem, now you need to fix it. Simplest thing to do is just change the lens and put the appropriate lens. But sometimes it's not possible if a certain amount of time has passed. Piggyback lenses are a very good option, which are now available easily in the Indian market. And of course, we can do a cornea-based procedure like a PRK or a LASIK. Treat the cause. So if you have a capsular distension, you can YAG the lens, or you can go and remove the viscoelastic from the bag surgically, or you can reposition the lens if it's not well centered or it's in the wrong place. So if the patient comes in the immediate postoperative period, recheck everything, see why it has happened. Recheck your IOL calculation in pseudophakic mode if necessary. and figure out if you have had a biometry error. Check the preoperative data. Check that you've used the right lens for this patient. Sometimes, if you have a big list and you don't follow your pre-op checklist properly, you might end up putting somebody else's lens in somebody else's eye, and that can certainly cause a refractive surprise. And of course, rule out common causes like capsular distension syndrome. So look at the eye carefully on the slit lamp and on the OCT. If it is a patient with a multifocal lens, which is not a routine lens, so these patients can often be very uncomfortable if they have a refractive surprise, because they have come in asking you for emmetropia, not just for distance, even for near, and you've given them an emmetropia even for distance. So patient, if it is soon after surgery, best thing is just remove the lens and put a new one before you develop adhesions. But if time has already passed, then one could consider a piggyback lens option, or you could do a refractive procedure on the cornea. You could also do a piggyback lens in the early postoperative period if you are not desirous of removing the lens, or you're fearful that you might damage the zonules or the capsule. If it is a monofocal lens, up to 4 weeks after surgery, again, IOL exchange is probably the best option. Otherwise, a piggyback lens or a surface ablation, one could plan. But of course, if it is after 4 weeks, then a piggyback lens, a corneal laser procedure, or you could also do a LASIK. I generally don't like to do a LASIK because I don't want to cut the cornea if possible. But if the patient is keen, you could do a LASIK, but make sure if you're doing a femto that your hinge is at the wound site. Otherwise, you will have a problem in your flap. If you use a toric IOL, make sure that you check if it's lying in the correct position. If the IOL is rotated, you need to put it back in the correct axis. So you can go back and see your calculation and put it back according to the original calculation. Or if you don't have the original calculation, somebody else has done it, you can use this website, which was alluded to by one of the previous speakers. You can also use modern tools like the iTrace, which has a software to help you calculate how much the lens should be turned. If you're not able to turn the lens, or if that is not the problem, then of course you can use a wavefront guided kind of a surface ablation to kind of compensate on the cornea the residual error, or one could do an IOL exchange, or a piggyback lens could also be put, which is available in toric format. So this is just a video to show the website of astigmaticfix.com, and I don't know why the video isn't moving, but basically you have to click calculator and it'll give you how much to rotate, etc., depending on your lens. I'm sorry, battery. Yes. So this is just a very interesting video in which I borrowed from my friend Dr. Harshul, which basically is showing that when you have to put in a lens or do an IOL exchange, it's a good idea to put in the second lens first behind the primary lens, and then you can kind of take out the first lens out of the bag and cut it out, because then you have like a cushion behind it and you won't end up damaging the capsule. I hope the videos are playing okay. So this is just a few case examples before I close. This is one of the cases, uneventful cataract surgery. You can see it's a well-centered lens, beautiful rexus, but immediately post-op, I'm seeing a 2 diopter refractive surprise. And sure enough, on slit lamp, you can see there's a gap between the IOL and the posterior capsule. So this is a case of a capsular distension syndrome. And the same thing is confirmed on the OCT. You can see a good amount of gap between the posterior surface of the lens and the PC. So basically, this viscoelastic is trapped in the capsule and it keeps kind of absorbing fluid, and that lens becomes bigger. So you need to release this viscoelastic out, otherwise it can lead to a long-term problem. So best is you can YAG the capsule anteriorly. So you don't want to do a posterior capsular YAG in the immediate postoperative period, right? So you can YAG it anteriorly in the area where you have space outside the optic. So you can see in this image here, superiorly, you can see that star-shaped opening in the anterior capsule, which we have created. And in the dilated pupil, that will allow for the viscoelastic to come out. Same thing, you can see that's opening very well in the retroillumination and a magnified image of the same. So postoperatively, this patient, the refractive surprise resolved. But there have been some patients where it hasn't worked. And in such cases, one can go and YAG the posterior capsule, or you take the patient up and aspirate out the residual viscoelastic. Prevention, of course, is to do a thorough OVD behind the lens also. This is one more interesting case. 61-year-old female had a multifocal, but ended up with a +4 refractive surprise with some cylinder as well. So the patient was extremely unhappy. So I decided to do a piggyback Sulcofix IOL, which is the sulcus fixated lens available from IOCare. You can see there's also some capsular phimosis and fibrosis. So this was the lens which was calculated, and this is just a surgical video in which we're showing that we are cutting out that fibrous capsule. Now I was concerned that removing this fibrosis might change the lens position and I might end up with a refractive surprise again. But luckily, after putting in the lens, as you can see, I'm sorry, the videos are playing a little slow. This is what the lens looks like. It looks like it's got 4 haptics and it's got a very thin profile, so it sits in very well. And in this case, you can see it's a toric lens because of the residual cylinder. And we managed to put the lens into the sulcus very smoothly. And you have to just tuck the haptics, trailing haptics in like so. I'm sorry, the videos are not playing very well. And you can see that the patient who was like that preoperatively, the capsular fibrosis has been enlarged and the second lens is fitting well. You can see the gap between the two. So ideal candidates are patients with an intact capsular bag, and pupil of iris also should be intact, and there should be no other problems that the patient has. So this is just a few seconds more. For hyperopic error, you have to multiply by 1.5 to the residual error, and for myopic errors, multiply by 1.2 to get the amount of sulcus fixated IOL that you can use. So you have Sulcoflex lenses from Rayner, and we have the Sulcofix, which I had shown you just a little earlier. So to conclude, refractive surprises are best prevented, but if you do end up with them, they can easily be treated also by cornea or lens-based approach with very good outcomes. Thank you.
Dr. Vinita?
We can't hear you, Dr. Vinita.
Yeah, thank you everyone, all my co-instructors for their expertise and their personal experiences in dealing with all types of patients with different types of situations where we have to do cataract surgery, and we are able to manage them with all these tips and tricks which have been given by each and every one of them in their own specific talks. And I hope that all the listeners, if there are any, I do not know, have benefited from our session. And if there are any questions, I don't know whether we have time for questions or not. So if we can take up any questions, if the hall coordinator allows us.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there any questions in the chat box or something? Because I've not seen the chat.
Now I cannot see any questions, ma'am.
Okay. So I think we are already through with the time.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
So then probably we can say bye and let the next session people to come in. Thank you.
I have a question to Mukesh. Can I take that?
Sure, sir. We have last 1 minute. We can take up the question for that.
Mukesh, what is a good time to see Angkor Wat?
To see what?
The Angkor Wat temple in Cambodia.
Oh God.
January. December, January.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.
Thank you everyone for the amazing session that we